In the early 1990s, as the Soviet Union crumbled, Chechnya declared its independence, igniting a fierce struggle against Russian forces. The ensuing wars devastated the region, with tens of thousands of lives lost and countless others displaced. Despite Russia's military efforts, Chechnya's desire for autonomy persisted, leading to a complex relationship with Moscow. Watch the video until the end, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to like it. There is very important information at the end of the video. Fast forward to today, Chechnya remains a symbol of Russia's challenges in maintaining control over its diverse territories. The region's quest for independence continues to stir debates about Russia's future stability and territorial integrity. In this video, we delve into the history of Chechnya's struggle for independence, its impact on Russia, and the broader implications for the region. Join us as we explore how Chechnya's secession could potentially alter the course of Russian history. Watch the video until the end, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to like it. There is very important information at the end of the video. Here's an extended version of your YouTube video intro. For decades, Chechnya has been at the center of one of the most complex and violent conflicts in the history of Russia. What started as a fight for independence in the 1990s has now evolved into a volatile relationship between Chechnya and Moscow, one that could hold the key to Russia's future. In the aftermath of the Soviet Union's collapse, Chechnya declared its sovereignty, triggering brutal wars that would reshape the region and leave deep scars on both sides. Despite years of Russian military dominance, Chechnya's spirit of resistance never truly faded, with its people continuing to demand autonomy, challenging Russia's grip on its diverse territories. Today, the stakes are higher than ever. The Chechen leader, Ramzan Kadyrov, a loyal ally of Vladimir Putin, holds a significant amount of power, yet Chechnya's independence movement remains an ever-present threat to Russia's unity. As the world watches, the question arises, could Chechnya's secession truly destroy Russia? In this video, we'll examine the long and turbulent history of Chechnya's fight for freedom, how the region's desire for independence has shaped Russia's current political landscape, and why the future of Russia could be at stake if Chechnya ever succeeds in breaking free. Join us as we explore the risks, the history, and the possible future of one of Russia's most volatile regions, and understand why Chechnya's secession could lead to the unraveling of the Russian Federation as we know it. When you come across videos and images of Ramzan Kadyrov, the head of the Chechen Republic, on social media, his appearance and behavior reflect what you might expect from a ruthless warlord. This controversial figure is a key player in the larger puzzle of Putin's reign in Russia, earning the nickname Putin's foot soldier from many observers. His role in overseeing the Russian Republic of Chechnya has been pivotal in silencing opposition and suppressing dissent, but his actions may have caused more trouble for Putin than he is worth. The insurgencies and wars in the North Caucasus have been a constant headache for Putin, and now the Russian president may be questioning whether his loyal puppet is really worth all the trouble. Kadyrov's tendency to make powerful enemies, along with his blatant human rights violations, has turned him into a growing nuisance. His stance as a staunch ally of Putin could eventually shift, and the repercussions for both men could be significant. One of the most disturbing allegations surrounding Kadyrov's rule is his involvement in the abduction, torture, and abuse of gay men in Chechnya, a dark chapter that only adds to his already controversial reputation. But this situation is what happens when you set up a foothold in a volatile region, only for it to become the very rock that pierces you. As we dive deeper into this topic, we also face the challenge of pushing back against Putin's bots, who often flood our videos with their propaganda. To help us combat this, please like and share this video with your friends and family. It truly helps us reach more people who need to hear these important discussions. Let's begin by exploring the history of Chechnya. What was the region like before the Soviet Union and before Ramzan Kadyrov's rise to power? Located in the North Caucasus of Eastern Europe, Chechnya is known for its rugged mountains and stunning lakes. The original inhabitants, known as the Chechens, were historically divided into two groups, the Kisti and the Dzuks. They were part of a larger ethnic group called the Nakh people, who were native to the North Caucasus. This vast region, known as the North Caucasus, is home to not only the Chechens but also smaller ethnic groups like the Abaza, the Ingush, and the Lezgins. The Chechen people primarily speak Chechen, a language that originated from the Nakh group, and it shares similarities with Ingush, spoken by their neighbors in Ingushetia. Despite being under Russian control for centuries, Chechens have preserved their language and culture, which still plays a central role in their identity. Before the arrival of Islam, the Chechens practiced a mix of religious traditions, many of which revolved around farming rituals and the worship of a goddess named Tui. When Islam spread through the region, most Chechens became Sunni Muslims, further shaping the identity of the Chechen Republic. But before we delve into the tragic defeats faced by the Chechens under Russian rule, let's take a moment to remember one of their greatest warriors, Imam Shamil. In the 19th century, when Islam arrived in the region, Shamil rose to prominence as a military leader who would become the face of Chechen resistance. His bravery and leadership united the various Highlander groups against the Russian Empire, and for a quarter of a century, he waged a relentless war to defend Chechnya and the surrounding territories from Russian occupation. Shamel's efforts proved that it was possible to resist the mighty Russian Empire, and he created a confederation of states in the North Caucasus that would challenge the Tsar's power. However, despite his success in leading the resistance, Shamil was eventually worn down by years of warfare. In 1859, after 25 years of fighting, Shamil was forced to surrender to the Russian Empire. His defeat marked the end of the Chechen resistance, but his legacy as a warrior and symbol of Chechen independence endures to this day. Everything that Imam Shamil did for Chechnya has become symbolic to the people, fueling their enduring desire for independence. The image of strong Chechen warriors and their relentless resistance was shaped by the legends of Shamil. During one of the most legendary battles, Imam Shamil demonstrated his unmatched warrior spirit. Surrounded by Russian soldiers, he was not about to surrender. In a bold move, he launched himself off an elevated platform, soaring over the heads of his enemies and cutting down 3 soldiers with a single stroke. But one soldier, fueled by rage, charged at him with a bayonet, piercing Shamil's side. Instead of succumbing to the wound, Shamil pulled the bayonet from his own flesh and in one swift motion, drove it back into the soldier's chest. Then, with astonishing agility, he leapt over the wall and vanished into the night. The Russian soldiers, stunned and uncertain, were left in disbelief. This moment of brilliance cemented Shamil's legacy, earning him respect even from Tsar Nicholas. When he finally surrendered, he was not executed but exiled to Russia, a testament to the respect he had earned. In his final words, Shamil proclaimed, "I am Shamil, the lowest of those Muslims who struggle for the independence and freedom of the Caucasus. I will not exchange the protection of Allah for the lordship of the Tsar." After the fierce resistance led by Imam Shamil, the Russian Empire realized it needed to adjust its strategy to break the strength of the North Caucasus. They offered Chechens and Ingush people the chance to leave for the Ottoman Empire. About 80% of them left, significantly weakening the resistance. Those who stayed could only conduct guerrilla raids, harassing Russian convoys and government posts. Before the rise of the Soviet Union, the North Caucasus experienced a fleeting moment of hope. On December 21, 1917, Chechnya, Ingushetia, and Dagestan declared independence from Russia, forming a united state called the United Mountain Dwellers of the North Caucasus. It seemed like everything they had fought for was finally coming to fruition. However, by 1921, Russian forces crushed this brief independence and forcibly absorbed the region, beginning years of terror under Soviet rule. Under Stalin's reign, Chechens endured immense suffering. In 1944, the entire population was falsely accused of collaborating with Nazi Germany, and more than 60% of the Chechen people were forcibly deported. Those who couldn't be moved were shot. The world turned a blind eye to this atrocity, and only in the early 2000s would people dare to call it a genocide. It wasn't until 1956, after Stalin's death, that the Chechens were allowed to return home. But when they did, they found that their land was no longer their own. Russian settlers had taken over their homes, and the Russian language and culture dominated. Despite this grim reality, hope seemed to return after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Chechnya, having seen the Baltic states break free, began its own independence movement. Under the leadership of former Soviet Air Force General and new Chechen President Zakhar Dudayev, the Chechen people hoped to finally escape Russian rule. But Boris Yeltsin, eager to maintain control over Russia's territories, argued that Chechnya wasn't like the Baltic states, it didn't have the same right to independence. This was a crushing blow for Chechens, but they refused to back down. In November 1991, Chechnya declared its independence unilaterally, sparking the First Chechen War. The Chechen Wars became infamous, partly due to the religious fervor driving the conflict. Chechen leader Akhmed Kadyrov, a devout Muslim-turned-guerrilla commander, declared a jihad against Russia, ordering every Chechen to kill at least 150 Russian soldiers. Despite Russia's overwhelming military superiority, they were unable to establish control over the mountainous terrain due to Chechen guerrilla tactics. Instead of engaging in large-scale battles, Chechen fighters excelled in daring raids. One such raid, the 1995 Budyanovsk hospital hostage crisis, brought international attention to the Chechen cause. Around 100 Chechen militants took over a hospital, holding over 2,000 Russian hostages. They demanded the release of Chechen prisoners and the withdrawal of Russian forces. Initially, Russia dismissed the demands, but they were eventually forced to negotiate and release some prisoners. This incident not only embarrassed Russia but also garnered international sympathy for the Chechens, highlighting the brutality of Russian actions. The First Chechen War was a defining moment for the region. It painted the Chechens as brave warriors who, despite being outgunned and outmanned, managed to stand up to the mighty Russian army. However, Russia's response was brutal. Jakhar Dudayev, the elected president of Chechnya, was assassinated in a missile strike, further intensifying the conflict and ensuring that the Second Chechen War would follow. The story of Chechnya's struggle has been a long and painful one, with moments of hope often followed by internal collapse. After the First Chechen War, there was a brief period of stability, but the Chechens were their own undoing. Instead of celebrating their victory over an invading force, internal conflicts began to brew. In January 1997, after the war, Chechnya held parliamentary and presidential elections. Aslan Maskhadov was elected president, and the new government began reconstruction efforts, with Russia contributing funds to rebuild the economy and infrastructure it had destroyed. Russia provided money for schools and hospitals, hoping to stabilize the region. However, as stability started to settle in, something sinister began to take root in Chechnya. Kidnapping became a rampant problem. Criminal gangs seized the opportunity to profit by demanding ransoms, amounting to over $200 million during Chechnya's brief period of independence. In 1998 alone, 176 people were kidnapped. Most of these kidnappings had political or religious motives, with Wahhabism, a radical Islamic ideology, growing in influence at the time. In response to the chaos, Chechen authorities declared a state of emergency in 1998. This instability was the perfect opportunity for Russia to reassert control over the region. In 1999, a series of apartment bombings killed over 300 people in Russian cities, and the blame was immediately placed on Chechen separatists. However, many journalists suspected that these bombings were a false flag operation orchestrated by the Russian secret services to justify a new military campaign against Chechnya. This time, Russia was better prepared for the conflict. In 2002, Chechen fighters attempted another dramatic act of defiance, taking control of a Moscow theater and holding 900 hostages. The hostage situation ended in disaster, with 117 hostages and 50 rebels dead. In response to this, Russia tightened its grip on Chechnya, and it was during this chaotic period that Vladimir Putin began to emerge as a key figure. But why has the fight for Chechnya been so fierce? After all, after years of resistance, one would think Russia might have given up on trying to control the region. The answer lies in Chechnya's strategic importance. Chechnya is a critical hub in Russia's oil infrastructure, and its separation from Russia would severely impact the country's economy and energy access. The North Caucasus region, with Chechnya at its heart, gives Russia vital access to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Chechnya is also strategically located on the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, which transports oil to Europe, a vital resource for Russia's economy. Beyond its economic value, Chechnya serves as Russia's gateway to the rest of the North Caucasus. The region borders Dagestan, Ingushetia, and Georgia, making it a crucial connection for Russia's influence in those areas. It's also close to Turkey and the Middle East, where Russia has long-standing trade relationships. The Middle East is responsible for about 20% of Russia's arms trade, with Saudi Arabia being one of its key oil partners. A Chechen separation would not only disrupt Russia's economic interests but would also complicate its dealings with the region. Russia has invested heavily in Chechnya, building infrastructure, transport systems, and urban development. There's no way Moscow would allow all that effort to go to waste. Additionally, Russia remains paranoid about extremism in Chechnya and sees maintaining control as a counterterrorism measure. With a history of terrorist attacks originating from the region, Russia cannot afford to let Chechnya slip away. Moscow fears that if Chechnya gains independence, it could embolden other separatist movements and become a future threat to the Kremlin. The battle is also deeply religious. The region has become a battleground between Orthodox Christianity and Islam, with Russia fighting to maintain its dominance in Eastern Europe. Moreover, the Kremlin's desire to control Chechnya is also an issue of pride and ego. While Russia may have lost control over other former Soviet territories, Chechnya remains the last key region that Russia refuses to relinquish. The imperialist mindset that has shaped Russia's identity still persists, and the Kremlin believes that one day it will return to its former glory. Chechnya has humiliated Russia too many times, and Moscow cannot afford to let this shame linger. This fight is as much about saving face as it is about geopolitical and economic power. Russia also doesn't want to appear weak to the international community. Even as the violence continued, international pressure mounted. In the 1990s, President Bill Clinton was outspoken about the violence in Chechnya. He urged then-President Boris Yeltsin to negotiate with the rebels to stop the bloodshed. The United Nations and the European Union also condemned Russia for its human rights abuses in Chechnya. But, as we know from recent history, Russia often ignores international condemnation. During the George W. Bush administration, the US again called on Putin to address human rights violations in Chechnya, but by then, the focus had shifted elsewhere, especially with the rise of tensions in Ukraine. While the world's attention moved on, countries like Georgia, Turkey and Azerbaijan, which share strong cultural and historical ties with Chechnya, have never stopped advocating for the region. Chechnya has long had strong ties with neighboring countries that share an interest in seeing the region free. Georgia has always offered refuge to Chechen fighters, while Azerbaijan has allowed Chechen leaders to operate from Baku. Even Ukraine, in a cruel twist of irony, once fought for Chechnya's independence, especially poignant since Chechen fighters later found themselves fighting alongside Russia in Ukraine's invasion. Despite the international sympathy for Chechnya's plight, it was not enough to push Russia out. When Vladimir Putin came to power, the situation grew even worse. According to Stanislav Belkovsky, a Moscow-based political analyst, Putin saw the pacification of Chechnya as one of his greatest achievements. Putin's deep psychological dependence on Chechnya and its strongman, Ramzan Kadyrov, who ensured the region's submission, became central to his strategy. During the Second Chechen War, Putin crafted his image as a tough leader, positioning himself as the one who finally subdued the Chechen insurgency. This war served as his campaign for the presidency, and his brutal approach to Chechnya gained him substantial popularity. Once Chechnya was under control, Putin shifted tactics. He set out to install puppet leaders, and this is where the Kadyrov family came into play. While most know of Ramzan Kadyrov, his late father, Akhmat Kadyrov, was the original key figure. Akhmat, initially an Islamic scholar and fighter for Chechen independence, had a falling out with the pro-independence government after the First Chechen War. He switched sides, allying with Putin. As a former KGB officer, Putin understood the failures of previous Russian strategies in Chechnya and decided to play a different game. Instead of continuing the war, he appointed Akhmat Kadyrov, the former Grand Mufti of Chechnya, as the leader during the Second Chechen War. Akhmat Kadyrov became a crucial ally in Russia's efforts, helping to locate key Chechen strongholds and creating a pro-Russian militia led by his family. This militia, known as the Kadyrovtsi, was instrumental in suppressing the Chechen resistance. After Akhmat's assassination in 2004, his son Ramzan took over, and Putin ensured that the Kadyrov family remained in power, cementing Russian control over the region. However, despite these efforts, Chechen rebels continued their fight for independence. The insurgency shifted tactics, and in 2004, Chechen fighters carried out one of the most infamous acts of defiance, the Beslan school siege. Armed rebels stormed a school in Beslan, holding over 1,000 hostages, many of them children. The rebels' demand was clear: Russian troops needed to withdraw from Chechnya, and Chechen prisoners should be released. But the Russian response was catastrophic. Rather than negotiating, Russian troops stormed the school, resulting in 2 explosions and intense gunfire. The siege ended with 334 people dead, including 186 children. The disaster was a devastating failure for Putin, and in 2017, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Russia had failed in its duty to protect the hostages, using indiscriminate force during the siege. The tragedy of Beslan remains a scar on Russia's history, and many mothers in the region still mourn the loss of their children, insisting that negotiations could have prevented the carnage. Instead of softening his approach, Putin only intensified his tactics, using the attack to justify reducing regional autonomy and further consolidating his power. From 2005 to 2014, Chechen rebels continued to resist, and in 2005, Putin's puppet leader, Akhmat Kadyrov, was assassinated, reportedly by Chechen separatists. Chechen fighters were also behind the bombing of the Chechen parliament in November 2006, an attack that injured over 60 people and killed 14. The attack was carried out by the Riyad al-Salihin Brigade, a militant Chechen separatist group, and led by the infamous Shamil Basayev. This only fueled Putin's anger and led to more intense surveillance and control over the region. The violence didn't end there. In 2009, Chechen rebels struck again. A bomb was detonated on a high-speed train traveling between Moscow and St. Petersburg, injuring 130 people. The attack was symbolic. Hitting the train, which connected Russia's 2 most important cities, sent a clear message: Chechnya was not done fighting. Throughout this period, Putin refused to acknowledge the depth of the region's resistance. He treated the insurgency as a nuisance that could be eliminated with force, but Chechnya's fighters were determined to continue their struggle. As a result, Chechnya remained a thorn in Russia's side, and the battle between them only escalated. After the first explosion, as investigators scoured the site near the town of Boy, around 400 kilometers, about 250 miles northwest of Moscow, another blast rocked the area, wounding one of the investigators. The Islam group in the North Caucasus claimed responsibility, stating that it was ordered by one of Russia's most wanted men, Chechen separatist leader Doku Umarov. Umarov was a constant thorn in Putin's side, masterminding many of the terrorist bombings in the 2000s. In 2011, he orchestrated the bombing of Moscow's Domodedovo airport, killing 37 and injuring 173. CCTV footage revealed the bomber, Magadeyev, a 20-year-old from Ingushetia, but it was Umarov who was pulling the strings, seeking to disrupt Russia's transport network. As the 2000s drew to a close, Chechen rebel activity slowed, partly due to the mass killings of Chechen leaders by Ramzan Kadyrov, Putin's puppet leader in Chechnya. However, the rebels' resolve didn't fade. They focused their attacks on Putin himself. Between 2004 and 2014, numerous assassination attempts were made on the Russian president. One of the most notable plots occurred in 2012, when two would-be assassins were captured in Ukraine's Black Sea port of Odessa. They planned to detonate landmines along Putin's motorcade route after an explosion at their apartment killed one of the conspirators. They claimed to be acting on behalf of Umarov's forces. The Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, eventually cornered and killed Umarov in 2014, marking a significant victory for Putin in the war against the Caucasus Emirate. But even in death, Umarov's legacy cast a long shadow. The storm had been quelled, but it was far from over. The conflict in Chechnya had, in many ways, followed Putin into his disastrous war in Ukraine. It's almost poetic how Chechen forces, led by Kadyrov's loyalists, now fight for Russia, while Chechen rebels fight for Ukraine, two opposing sides, but both with deep personal histories with Putin. On one side, Kadyrov's forces, the notorious Kadyrovtsi, entered Ukraine in 2022, eager to prove their loyalty to Putin. These forces were once called into service in the 2000s to suppress Chechen separatists. In Ukraine, they quickly became notorious for their brutal methods, including extrajudicial killings, kidnappings, and the torture of Kadyrov's critics and rivals. However, when things went wrong in southern Ukraine, Kadyrov shifted the blame onto Russian military leadership, refusing to take responsibility for the losses his forces suffered after Ukrainian artillery shelled their positions. Meanwhile, Chechen rebels in Ukraine, such as the Shik Mansour Battalion, led by a man known only as Mansour, fight fiercely against both Russian soldiers and their fellow Chechens serving under Putin. These rebels are not afraid of the fight. They've seen horrors in Ukraine that are nothing compared to the suffering they endured at Russia's hands during the First and Second Chechen Wars. Mansour, who was only 13 when his village was destroyed by Russian forces, now leads a battalion of rebels fighting for Ukraine's freedom, and for Chechnya's. As the war rages on, more Chechens continue to join the fight against Russia. In 2023, volunteer fighters, including some from the Crimean Tatar minority, joined the Ukrainian side, hoping that a victory in Ukraine might one day lead to their own liberation from Russia's grip. One soldier in the Jakar Dudayev battalion, named after the late Chechen leader, declared that the goal wasn't just to free Ukraine but to eventually free Chechnya. The tide of history is turning. Ukraine's victories give hope to those who've suffered under Russian occupation, and the dream of freedom from Moscow is spreading across former Soviet territories.
For Putin, this is a nightmare.
His ability to suppress the voices of Chechen rebels, his reliance on Ramzan Kadyrov's violent regime, and his increasingly frail position in the war all spell trouble. When Ukraine wins, Putin's fragile empire may collapse. The message is clear. The chains that Russia has placed on these regions are weakening. The rebellion is spreading, and Chechnya's battle for freedom may soon reignite. But the real question remains: can Kadyrov continue to hold Chechnya under Putin's thumb? His loyalty is in question. He may fight for Russia now, but how long will that last when the inevitable collapse of Russia's military might signal a new era for Chechnya? Putin's reliance on Kadyrov's brutal tactics could backfire, especially as Kadyrov, like his father before him, is a man who changes sides when it suits him. Chechnya's history with Russia is long and complex, but the rebel spirit, now alive and well in Ukraine, shows no signs of fading. And as long as the fire of resistance burns, Putin will have to watch over his shoulder.